Welcome to another episode of the Power Law Investor. Today is September 18th, 2024, a Thursday, and we're going to be discussing how the daily DCA using Power Law crypto assets, chiefly Bitcoin and Caspa, is coming along. Again, this is not financial advice, it's only for informational purposes. And we're going to go ahead and see how the DCA is shaping up. So currently, Bitcoin is trading at about $61,500. Caspa is about 17.17 and 17 cents and a third. And today is September 18th, so we just had the rate cut from the Fed, which dropped the Fed rate down by 0.5%. We'll discuss what the implications of that might be in this video also. But before we do that, let's just go ahead and check out where we are in terms of how our DCA is coming along. Let's go to the screen here. So far, we started off at $10,000 in cash. We've now got 7,600 in cash, and we've got about 0.125 Bitcoin, and the amount of Caspa that we purchased is about 10,000. And we have 600 in cash available because our allocation is 20% cash. And when we look at the total invested, we've invested $3,000 and have got an overall return of just over 3.5%. So are positive. And this is the way the DCA works is we buy the same amount every day. When prices are low, we get more. And when prices are high, we get less. So over time, we end up buying more when the prices are low. So when the prices do eventually go up, we end up being more in profit. So you can look up DCAing in different places if you want to understand that. Won't go much into depth into this video. So let's go ahead as a reminder, the power law, which we can see here for Bitcoin, is just the trend line of the price data relative to time in the log space. So in the log space, this ends up being a line over here. The blue data is the price, and the orange line is the trend line of the price. That is the general direction which price is going. It has a very high R squared, which means a lot of the variation in the data can be explained by the trend line, which is a mathematical way of saying that the trend line is very good. And then using this equation, we can project forward into time, and assuming that the trend line holds and the future is like the past, we know what the price would be 6 months, a year or so far in the future. Of course, this doesn't allow us to predict short-term movements, but in the long term, we can use the trend line. So now in the log space, we have a linear trend line, but when we convert it to the regular space, we end up with a curved line. So you can see that orange line has a nice little curve, and today is in September, but I've projected this 1 year into the future. And using the equation that we derived, we can figure out what that value might be. So if we look at this, for example, where we are in terms of Bitcoin, the trend, we are actually below the trend value right now. I'm just going to zoom in over here so we can see this a little more clearly, right? So the orange line is the trend line. That wasn't very helpful. Let's try and make this a little easier. So the orange line is the trend line. We briefly went above that, and now we're below the trend line. That's what the discounted value here refers to, that we're 21% below the trend. And based on the projections for the power law, we expect a 6-month return of about 52% and a 12-month return 1 year from today for being about 80%, which is pretty amazing. Similarly, we can do the same analysis for Caspa. Here is the line in the log space. As you can notice, the equation is different, but it has a very good R squared fit also. And when we go ahead and project for Caspa going forward, you can see that it is now about 37% below the trend line, and the expected return in 6 months is about 200%, and the expected return in a year's time is about 440%. So not bad at all. Just looking a little bit more into this Caspa in detail, a week ago or so, we had it actually, let me zoom into this a little bit more. we saw the price of Casper dip below this purple line. And for my regular subscribers, you know that we've talked about how the 40 below the 40% is generally a good buying opportunity. And for those of you that may have followed my advice, you'll see that it's already bounced above this line, right? So it was trading down all the way to about 14.5 cents. It almost touched 14 cents on the intraday. This is just the daily. But now it's above 17.5 cents. And really the line in the sand happens to be this green line, which is a 50% discount to the trend line. Of course, we don't know what happens in the future, but historically, buying at that point has resulted in fairly good outcomes because it seems to bounce up very quickly from that. So if you went on the hourly chart, you see that it had hit about 14 cents, but really the line in the sand around this time was about 13 cents. So if you start placing limit orders close to that, odds are, again, it's not financial advice, just for information, odds are if the future or the present is like the past, you'll have fairly good returns outcome from this point. Okay, so let's see. Coming back to the algorithm is currently suggesting a 55% allocation to Caspa, a 25% allocation to Bitcoin, and leaving 20% in cash. Before we go further into describing things a little further on what I think is going to happen in the future, the algorithm over here works by looking at what the projected returns for Caspa and Bitcoin are based on their power laws. But then it also does an estimation, given that we have so much more data for Bitcoin. Bitcoin's been around for, almost 14, 15 years at this point, whereas Caspa's barely above 2.5, 3 years old. And so the reliability of that trend is quite different. So the algorithm takes that into account into suggesting with this allocation. And that allows us to move between these two assets as time goes on. Some of you might be very excited about what happens with this rate cut that the Fed announced. Is this really alt season? Are things really going to take off? Are we going to get crazy amounts of returns on Caspa and Bitcoin? And we have to be a little cautious about this because the last time that rate cuts happened, Bitcoin actually dipped down to its 100-week simple moving average, right? And I believe the reason for that is because the rate cuts come in, but quantitative easing hasn't started. It suggests that the economy is not doing particularly well, and so there's a flight to safety, and Bitcoin is a speculative asset, so the price of it can drop. So while we'd, of course, all of us would be very happy if Bitcoin took off because it would propel the altcoin market along with it and our favorite friend Caspa, that might not happen. In fact, if you look at the rate cut happening today, Bitcoin's around 61,000. If it would drop down to the 100-week simple moving average, which it did last time, that would imply a price of about $38,000. And while that would be a big drop, it is actually not out of bounds about what the power law is saying, because when we jump into the power law over here, you can see that in the past it has hit that 50% trend line and bounces up from that. We're in a different part of the cycle and it's a little more involved discussion, but it could again come down to the supporting minus 50% trend line. And if that would happen, we can see that in September that implies another $38,000. So the power law and what happened last time using the 100-week simple moving average are giving us the same value. So I don't think it's unreasonable for that to happen. But if that does happen, that should be thought of as a buying opportunity because the returns will be so much more from that point onwards. Again, we're believers in the power law. We have this mathematical construct that has held for the last 14 years. So why wouldn't it continue holding? And if it does drop down to within those parameters, it's a buying opportunity. And that is exactly why the algorithm, let's jump to that, keeps us 20% in cash, because when we get to these points, we want to have cash to be deployed. The worst thing that could happen is that we deploy too early, and when the prices are really good, there's no cash left to deploy. That's happened to me personally in the past, and that's a very painful experience. And I'd much rather have cash and the price not go down to where you know and the price doesn't go down, than not have cash and then just be holding my hands and saying, oh my god, you know, I don't have any cash left to deploy. So that's the reason that the algorithm always makes sure that there is some cash left to deploy. And if you can imagine, let's come back to the chart. If Bitcoin, where is it? Here we go. If Bitcoin drops all the way down to here, we can imagine what it's going to do to Kaspa, right? Because Kaspa's here, typically it goes, the worst case that it goes down to the 50%, but if Bitcoin were to dump that badly, we don't know what would happen. We can't say with the same amount of certitude that we have for Bitcoin because we have less data for Kaspa. If we've only got 2 years of data, we don't know what might happen. And in that case, we could have some phenomenal buying opportunities, again, assuming the power law holds. But you're watching this because you think the power law might hold, right? Or at least want to give it a chance. So if that does happen, we know that we're going to have cash to deploy. And if it doesn't happen, we're buying small amounts on a daily basis. So we're protecting ourselves that way too. So I don't know what's going to happen, what the next time these numbers are going to look like when I make a video next week. But the important thing is that the power law is providing us with some guidance on what might happen and helps us plan to deploy our cash at the best risk reward going forward, but also gets us in currently and makes sure that we're not just sitting on our hand hoping for that low price to come, which might never come. So that's where we are right now. If you enjoyed the content, please like and subscribe. You can also follow me on X for more frequent updates, and I'll put the link in the description, or you can just search for Power Law Investor. That's all for now. Cheers.